Usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis, there's this deep expectation of precision.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It feels like engineering.
Yeah.
You break your arm, the x-ray shows this jagged white line on a black background, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is. There is the problem.
Right. It's binary.
Yeah.
And I mean, we find that deeply comforting. We really like our problems to be visible, categorized, and solvable through just direct observation.
Yeah, exactly. But then you step into the world of complex systems, whether that's, I don't know, neurodevelopment, global economics, or like algorithmic decision-making, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just broken.
Yeah, totally useless.
You are looking at a landscape that is incredibly murky. You have mountains of data, thousands of charts, and yet nobody can point to a single jagged line and say what is actually true, or like more importantly, what we should actually do about it.
Which I think brings us right to the core mission of our deep dive today.
Yes, exactly.
We are exploring this fascinating, massive framework called Wisdom in the Information Age, or WIA.
WIA, yeah.
Right. And it's this incredibly detailed constitutional architecture designed to address what they call a terrifying new scarcity. I mean, we've completely solved the problem of making data abundant, right?
Oh, yeah. Data is everywhere.
And we've solved the problem of making computation unbelievably cheap. But in doing so, we've created this catastrophic deficit of disciplined judgment.
Yeah, and the architects of this framework, they point out something really fascinating. If you go back to 1997, there were these forecasters, Joseph Coates, John Mahaffey, and Andy Hines.
Yeah, the 97 forecast.
Right. And they mapped out the trajectory of information technology. They saw it moving through these stages. Like we had the data processing stage, then the interpretation stage, then the knowledge generation stage.
Which is kind of where AI brought us, right?
Exactly. But they predicted a fourth stage. They said we would reach a point where the core problem wasn't how to generate knowledge, but asking, well, how should that knowledge actually be used?
And looking around today, I mean, we are just stranded entirely in that fourth stage.
We really are. For everyone listening, you see this every day. And the WIA framework argues that being stranded in this stage has created this foundational crisis, which they call authority inflation.
Authority inflation, yes. That is the central risk of our time, according to the text.
It really is. So how do they define that?
So authority inflation is, it's the silent, unearned migration of a claim.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Sure. It's when a narrow technical finding or maybe a clever statistical model or even just the prestige of a massive institution somehow silently transforms into a broad, unqualified truth. Or worse, a command to act.
So let me try to visualize that. You have like a scientist in a lab, right?
Yep.
And they find that a specific chemical reaction works under very tight controlled conditions in a vacuum.
Right. Perfectly valid.
That's a valid, narrow technical finding.
Right.
But by the time it hits the press release and then the policy briefing, it is inflated into we must completely restructure the energy grid using this new chemical.
Oh, that's...
Like the underlying evidence didn't change at all, but the authority of the claim just inflated like a hot air balloon.
That's a perfect example. And the framework points out this deeply counterintuitive reality, which is that high intelligence actually worsens this problem.
Wait, hold on. How does being smarter make it worse? I mean, shouldn't a highly intelligent system like, say, an advanced AI or a room full of PhDs, shouldn't they be better at avoiding errors?
You would definitely think so, right? But high intelligence increases the capacity to generate highly persuasive reasons.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, a system that can fluently defend almost any conclusion can create the appearance of warrant without actually improving the underlying evidence at all.
So it just sounds really convincing.
Right. It can use sophisticated models, numerical precision, and just rhetorical fluency to overwhelm scrutiny. This system might be computationally powerful, but it confuses a model with reality. It confuses a numerical result with an accurate result.
Okay, let me unpack this, because that reminds me of like a silver-tongued lawyer who possesses zero actual physical evidence, right?
Oh, yeah.
But they win the jury over purely on rhetorical fluency. Like the lawyer is talking fast, using big words, the math looks incredibly complex on the whiteboard,
Right.
and everyone just kind of nods along and hands over the keys to the city.
Exactly. The authority is inflated purely by the presentation. There's no substance.
Wow.
And the WIA framework states that rhetorical fluency, model sophistication, and institutional prestige are constitutionally non-self-authenticating.
Meaning they can't prove themselves.
Right. None of them are allowed to certify their own authority. Information abundance plus high intelligence does not automatically equal warranted authority.
So because rhetoric and computation can be so dangerously persuasive, we really can't just rely on, the good intentions of the people or the machines generating the data.
No, not at all.
We need a literal constitution to govern how authority moves.
And that constitution is built on 3 fundamental laws. These are non-negotiable constraints applied to all subsystems in the WIA framework.
Okay, let's walk through those because this is the meat of it. The first one is the non-promotion law.
Yes. The non-promotion law states that no claim may be promoted to a stronger epistemic, technical, normative, decision, or execution status without additional warrants specific to that transition.
Okay, in English.
In simpler terms, you cannot upgrade a claim without specific proof justifying the upgrade.
So if I say, I have proven that it is technically feasible to build a bridge out of this new experimental glass, I cannot silently upgrade that claim to, this is the optimal material for the bridge.
Exactly. Feasible is not optimal.
Because proving it won't collapse doesn't prove it's cheap or easy to maintain.
Right, and the leap from feasible to optimal is one of the most common illegal promotions we see. Just because something meets the basic constraints does not mean it is the best possible solution.
That happens in tech all the time.
Oh, constantly. The framework also highlights that, and this is a massive one, knowledge is not duty.
Knowledge is not duty. Okay, explain that.
So just because an institution possesses a factual piece of information about a problem, that does not automatically mean they have a moral duty or the operational authority to act on it.
Oh.
Yeah, you cannot just slide from knowing a fact to commanding an action without a normative bridge connecting the two.
Which falls perfectly into law 2, which is the separation of authority.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't illegally promote a claim, you also can't have one type of authority silently absorb another.
Right, and the WIA framework is incredibly strict here. Epistemic competence, which basically means knowing the facts or calculating the math correctly.
Being the smartest person in the room.
Yeah, being the smartest in the room. That does not automatically confer moral authority. Moral authority does not automatically confer policy authority. And policy authority does not automatically confer execution authority.
So, to make that concrete, if we have the smartest nuclear physicist in the room, they have epistemic competence, right? They understand the physics of the reactor better than anyone alive.
Yeah.
But that does not mean they are the one who gets to make the moral decision about, where to build the plant.
Yeah.
And it definitely doesn't mean they get to unilaterally push the button to turn it on.
Exactly. Fact does not equal duty. Duty does not equal decision. It prevents what they call a wisdom component from becoming a hidden sovereign.
A hidden sovereign, like a shadow dictator.
Yeah. For example, an ethics review board can identify a protected moral duty. They can say, this experimental trial violates patient consent.
Okay.
But they're explicitly barred from altering the factual confidence of the underlying scientific evidence just to suit their moral preferences.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. They can't say, because this violates consent, the drug doesn't work. They have to keep their authority in their lane.
That makes a lot of sense. You don't want the people doing the math to dictate the morality, and you definitely don't want the people doing the morality to alter the math. So we have non-promotion, and we have separation of authority. But what happens when we make a legally warranted, perfectly separated decision, but then, the world changes?
So that is governed by Law 3. Corrigibility.
Corrigibility.
Authority that was once warranted must remain capable of becoming unwarranted.
Okay.
A decision that was justified at time zero does not receive perpetual legitimacy merely because it was once legitimate. If the supporting conditions change, the authority must be capable of expiring or being reversed.
See, I have to push back on this because in practice, doesn't corrigibility just mean endless waffling?
How so?
Well, if a decision can always be reversed because the conditions change, how does anything ever get done? Like, if every public policy or corporate strategy could be instantly reopened because someone found a single new data point, commitments just cease to be credible.
Right.
Society would just freeze up in this continuous oscillation of making and unmaking decisions every Tuesday.
And the architects anticipated that exact failure mode. Continuous oscillation isn't corrigibility, it's just systemic noise. Right. A system that reacts to every minor fluctuation doesn't learn, it just vibrates. So to solve this, the framework introduces the temporal plane and this concept of review stability.
Okay, so how do you stabilize a decision that is fundamentally supposed to be reversible?
By establishing pre-committed triggers and scheduled reviews at the exact moment the decision is made.
Oh, I see.
You don't leave a decision open to perpetual daily debate, but you also don't lock it in a vault forever. When you authorize an action at time zero, you attach specific conditions.
Like what?
You might say, we will review this policy in 2 years. Or we will immediately reopen this decision if the inflation rate exceeds 5%, or we will reconsider if the safety incidents fall outside the specific mathematical envelope.
Ah, so you are defining the terms of the reversal up front.
Exactly.
You are telling the system exactly what kind of evidence it takes to unmake the decision before you even start.
Furthermore, alongside those pre-committed triggers, there's a novel evidence path.
Novel evidence.
Right, because this prevents the trigger list itself from becoming a closed loop where you blind yourself to unexpected black swan events.
Like COVID or something totally out of left field.
Exactly. But all of this requires strict historical integrity. The warrant for the decision at time zero is not the same as the warrant at time one.
What do you mean?
When new evidence emerges and a policy is reversed, an entirely new state is created. The system explicitly forbids rewriting the old record to make the institution look wiser or more foolish in hindsight. You don't get to pretend you knew it all along.
Okay, so we have our 3 laws forming the foundation. Non-promotion, separation of authority, and corrigibility. But I want to zoom in on how that first law non-promotion actually works in the trenches.
Okay, yeah.
Because how do we practically stop a mathematical finding from pretending to be a real-world reality? Because honestly, this happens in the news every single day.
Every single day.
A researcher publishes a paper on a specific protein behavior in a petri dish, and by the evening news, it's being touted as a universal cure for a major disease.
Yeah, the science journalism hype cycle. To operationalize the non-promotion law and stop that, the architecture relies on the qualification principle.
The qualification principle.
Yes. This is the mechanism that mandates that the conditions of a claim are fundamentally inseparable from its authority.
Okay.
A claim simply does not exist in a vacuum. Its validity is strictly tied to the context in which it was established.
The framework uses a specific schematic notation for this, right? The C given A, D, MU formula.
Yes, and breaking that down is really crucial. So C is the claim itself, the proposition or finding.
Right.
A stands for assumptions, the material assumptions required for the claim to hold true.
Like assuming standard room temperature.
Exactly. D is the domain, the validated environment or scope, like a specific demographic population or a physical temperature regime.
Okay, so we have claim, assumptions, domain.
Then M is the method or model used to establish the claim. And finally, U is the uncertainty, the relevant, unresolved, or residual margin of error.
So for the listener, claim requires assumptions, domain, method, and uncertainty. It's a package deal.
A total package deal. And the critical rule is this. Removing any of these material qualifiers during reporting, summarization, or serializing data to another system is considered an illegal authority promotion.
Wow. So for you listening, think about this like buying a highly specialized vehicle. Stripping these qualifiers away is like selling someone a race car, but ripping off the sticker that says, only operates on perfectly flat, dry asphalt.
Right.
The machine works flawlessly under its intended conditions. But because the context is fatally missing, you take it off-roading, the axle snaps, and you cause a total disaster. The car wasn't broken. The communication of its domain was broken.
That's a great way to picture it. And the WIA framework calls that exact phenomenon the algorithm trap.
The algorithm trap.
Yeah. This trap occurs whenever an artifact of computation, simulation, or mathematics acquires empirical or engineering authority that the artifact itself has not actually established.
So trusting the math too much. Basically, models are conditional worlds. Numerical truth is highly distinct from model truth, and a flawless calculation does not guarantee a correct real-world engineering decision. So the source text goes into some incredibly deep technical examples to prove this point. I want to translate one of them because I think it shows how easily even the smartest systems fall into this algorithm trap.
Oh, the KKT trap.
Yeah, the KKT trap in optimization. The original text uses a lot of raw calculus and algebra to explain this. Hessian matrices, lambdas, negative definites.
Very dense stuff.
Extremely dense. But let's step back and look at the logic of what the math is actually doing.
It's a brilliant example. The core problem is finding the optimal solution, the absolute minimum, while subject to a constraint.
Right. So let's imagine you are like an algorithmic drone, and your job is to fly over a massive, rugged mountain range and find the absolute lowest point in the entire region, the deepest valley.
Okay.
But there is a constraint.
Yeah.
You are not allowed to fly past a specific boundary fence. You have to find the lowest point inside the park.
Right, that's your constraint. So an engineer programs the drone with the standard mathematical equations for finding a stationary point.
Which means?
The drone runs its calculations, looking for where the slope levels out completely, indicating it has hit the bottom. It finds a spot, the equations balance perfectly, and it beams back a message. I have found the optimal minimum point.
But the drone fell into the algorithm trap. It stripped away its qualifiers. First, it didn't check the shape of the terrain, what the math calls convexity.
Yes.
The drone found a place where the ground leveled out, but it wasn't the bottom of a valley. It was just a flat ledge on the side of a steep cliff. Because the problem wasn't convex, the mathematical equation for flat didn't actually mean the bottom.
That is the first fatal error. The algorithm promoted a candidate point into an optimal point without the required warrant of convexity.
It just assumed flat meant bottom.
Exactly. And the second error involves the constraint, the boundary fence.
Right. The math uses a multiplier to factor in the fence. But the drone didn't check the sign of the multiplier?
The lambda sign.
Yeah. So in our analogy, the drone found a flat ledge, but that ledge was actually 10 miles outside the park boundary. The math equations were technically solved, but because the qualifiers were ignored, the drone confidently presented a completely invalid solution as the absolute truth.
The mathematics were internally flawless, but the authority of the claim inflated from "we solved the local gradient equation" to "we found the optimal real-world solution."
It's terrifying when you think about it.
It is. Stationarity does not equal optimality without convexity. That is the non-promotion law applied directly to algorithmic logic.
And the framework points out we see this same trap in software development all the time, specifically with algorithmic complexity like big O notation.
Big O is a perfect example of this. A computer scientist might develop an algorithm and prove that it has an asymptotic bound of, say, O and log n.
Okay, translate that for the non-coders.
That is a mathematical guarantee about how the algorithm scaled as the data gets infinitely large. But the framework insists that this bound requires a specified input measure and a theoretical computational model.
Right, it's the theoretical top speed of an engine on, like, a frictionless test track.
Exactly, frictionless. But engineers will often take that theoretical bound and strip the qualifiers, assuming it directly translates to practical wall clock speed in the real world.
They assume O and log n always means fast.
Right. But better asymptotic complexity does not automatically equal better software. In reality, the hardware architecture, the memory hierarchy, the way data physically moves across the silicon, and the constant factors hidden by the big O notation can completely dominate the actual observed performance.
So you might have an algorithm with a vastly superior theoretical speed, but if it requires pulling data from a slow hard drive constantly, a technically slower algorithm that keeps everything in fast cache memory will beat it every single time.
Every single time. Which highlights a profound distinction in the framework, the gap between verification and validation.
Verification and validation, what's the difference?
Verification asks, did we build the thing right?
Okay.
Validation asks, did we build the right thing?
Oh, that's good.
A system can be fully verified. The implementation can faithfully match every single mathematical model and written requirement. But it can still fail completely in deployment because the requirements themselves were wrong, or they lacked real-world validation.
Right.
Promoting a verified tag to a validated tag without external real-world evidence is an illegal authority promotion.
Okay, so we have established these massive guardrails to protect a single claim from inflating its authority by keeping its qualifiers attached. We keep the C, given A, D, M, U, intact.
Yes, the qualifiers are safe.
But here's the next vulnerability. What happens when it's not just one isolated claim?
Right.
What happens when you are a decision maker and 10 different reports from 10 different prestigious institutions land on your desk and they all tell you the exact same wrong thing?
That is the nightmare scenario.
Because even if they all have their qualifiers attached, the sheer volume of consensus is going to overwhelm your judgment, isn't it?
This is one of the most dangerous phenomena in the information age. And the WIA framework addresses it with a canonical invariant, the Independence Invariant.
The Independence Invariant.
This principle states that consensus does not imply independent corroboration.
Say that again.
Consensus does not imply independent corroboration. The mere existence of widespread agreement among multiple sources does not, by itself, constitute independent evidence for a claim.
So just because 10 people say it doesn't make it 10 times more true.
The architecture is specifically designed to prevent a failure mode known as consensus laundering.
Consensus laundering. That sounds nefarious.
It often isn't even intentional. This happens when multiple reports, sensors, or organizations are treated as separate, confirming voices, but they actually originate from a single root source, or they share identical systemic biases.
Okay, think about like a rumor at a crowded party. One person makes up a completely fabricated story about the host. They whisper it to 3 people. Those 3 people are shocked, and they each go tell 3 more people. Suddenly, 12 people are all walking around repeating the exact same story. If you walk into that party late and you ask 4 different groups of people what is going on, they will all tell you the same story.
And your brain naturally thinks, wow, multiple independent people are confirming this fact, it must be true.
Right. But it's not a chorus of independent voices. It's just an echo of one voice bouncing around the room.
An echo, not a chorus. That's a vital distinction in WIA. To enforce this, the architecture explicitly bans authority by aggregation.
Authority by aggregation.
You cannot upgrade the epistemic authority of a claim simply by collecting a massive number of dependent sources or highly correlated detectors. If you have 100 thermometers in a room all placed directly over the same heating vent, taking 100 readings does not give you a more accurate picture of the room's average temperature.
It just tells you the vent is hot.
Exactly. It just gives you a highly confident, mathematically precise illusion.
But in a massive digital ecosystem, how does the system actually know if it's looking at an echo or a chorus? Like, how do you track the lineage of a piece of data when it has been copied and pasted through a dozen different reports?
Through an operational mechanism called the evidence graph.
The evidence graph.
This is a massive departure from how we currently track information. Right now, we use flat citation lists.
Like a bibliography.
Exactly. A bibliography at the end of a white paper just tells you what documents exist and were referenced somewhere in the text. It's a flat list. WIA uses a typed directed graph. It maps derived from and depends on relationships for every single piece of information.
So it's literally drawing structural lines of lineage between every data point, model, and conclusion.
Yes. The nodes in the graph represent observations, raw data sets, claims, models, and conclusions. And the edges, the lines connecting them, define the specific relationships.
Right, like how they interact.
Does this node support that node? Does it contradict it? Is it derived from that data set? Does this model assume that constant? By mapping these dependencies computationally, the graph makes evidentiary independence visible.
So if there's a rumor at the party,
If 10 prestigious reports all trace their primary data back to one single flawed origin node, the graph exposes that vulnerability instantly.
wow. If I am an executive or a policymaker, this completely changes the nature of institutional memory and decision-making.
Completely.
If I look at a dashboard and see a massive spike in a threat metric, the evidence graph forces me to pause. It forces me to ask, are these actually 100 independent sensors detecting a real-world event, or is it one sensor feeding data into 100 different downstream dashboards?
It creates the foundation for what the framework calls inference auditing. When the architecture evaluates the force of agreement, it doesn't just count the raw number of sources.
Because volume isn't truth.
Right. It looks at shared models, shared financial incentives, and shared failure modes among those sources. It prioritizes the provenance and true independence of information over the sheer volume of consensus.
Okay, let's take a breath and look at where we are. We have our claims properly qualified. We avoided the algorithm trap. We've used our evidence graph to ensure we aren't laundering consensus and confusing an echo for a chorus.
We are doing great so far.
We have proper, independent, qualified evidence. But having good evidence is only half the battle. How does that evidence actually flow into a real-world action? Like, how does the framework govern the entire messy journey from a piece of raw data to a physical execution in the real world?
To manage that massive journal, the WIA architecture divides governance into 7 constitutional planes.
7 planes.
Each plane addresses a distinct dimension of judgment and action, and they are ordered logically. You cannot skip a plane.
Let's walk through the journey of these planes because understanding why they are separated is really crucial.
The journey begins with the purpose plane. Before you look at data, before you build models, you have to define the problem to be solved and the success criteria.
Okay, makes sense.
Once the purpose is locked, you move to the epistemic plane. This governs what may responsibly be believed based on the evidence. This is where your evidence graph and your qualifiers live.
So purpose defines what we want. Epistemic defines what is true.
Correct. From there, you move to the normative plane. This identifies the duties, rights, and ethical values that constrain our actions.
The morality of it.
Yes. Next is the strategic plane, which models how human agents will inevitably try to adapt to or game the new rules we are creating.
Oh, we have to anticipate the cheating before we make the decision.
Exactly. Then all of those inputs, purpose, epistemic, normative, and strategic, flow into the decision plane. This is where the inputs are integrated to determine a warranted course of action.
The actual choice.
Right. Once decided, it moves to the execution plane, which controls the physical or institutional permission to actually act. And finally, the temporal plane manages the life cycle of that authority, tracking the history and scheduling the reconsideration we discussed earlier.
It is an incredibly rigorous gauntlet. Now, the epistemic, decision, execution, and temporal planes feel very structural, very logical. But the purpose plane and the normative plane seem incredibly vulnerable to human nature.
Oh, they are the most vulnerable.
Let's dive deep into the purpose plane first. How can purpose possibly be governed by a constitutional framework? People change their minds about what they want all the time.
The purpose plane is upstream of optimization, and that makes it the most critical point of failure. A system can be mathematically flawless, epistemically sound, and perfectly executed at every later stage, but still result in total disaster because it was solving the wrong problem.
Doing the wrong thing perfectly.
Exactly. The major hazard the framework identifies here is called objective laundering.
Objective laundering. Okay. How does an objective get laundered?
Objective laundering happens when a measurable proxy, usually a convenience metric that is easy to track, gradually becomes treated as the actual foundational purpose of the institution.
Give me an example of that.
Because our modern optimization algorithms are so incredibly good at maximizing a metric, the proxy gets more and more successful, which paradoxically makes the underlying error harder to see.
Okay, think about like a school district. The true foundational purpose of the school is to create well-rounded, thoughtful, capable citizens who can navigate the world.
Right, a noble purpose.
But thoughtful citizen is incredibly hard to measure on a spreadsheet. So the administration uses standardized test scores as a proxy metric. It's measurable, it's quantifiable.
And then what happens?
Over a decade, the entire institution slowly forgets about the thoughtful citizen part and optimizes purely for the test score. They cut art, they cut recess, they teach purely to the test. The proxy completely laundered the objective.
That is a perfect, tragic example of objective laundering. To prevent this, the purpose plane requires explicit, unyielding traceability. You have to clearly distinguish between a need, a requirement, a constraint, an objective, a preference, and a solution. Hiding one inside another is a constitutional failure.
The source text gives a really practical engineering example of this using caster wheels, right?
Yes, the caster wheels example perfectly illustrates how a solution can hijack a requirement. Consider the statement, operators must be able to move the device safely. That is a validated need. It describes the fundamental goal.
The goal is movement.
Right. Now, translating that need into an engineering requirement might look like this. 2 trained operators shall be able to move the assembled device 20 meters over a level indoor surface without powered lifting equipment.
Okay, that is a verifiable requirement. It is specific, but it doesn't dictate how to do it.
Exactly. But if the document suddenly says, the device must use caster wheels, that is a solution masquerading as a requirement.
And if you bake the solution directly into the requirement document, you destroy all alternative innovation before the analysis even begins.
You've already made the decision.
Yeah. What if a hover track system is safer? What if a Teflon slide is more efficient? By collapsing the solution into the requirement, you have illegally constrained the architecture's ability to find the optimal path.
Traceability is the only defense against that. A metric or solution that cannot be explicitly traced back to a validated need may be useful operationally, but it must not silently acquire governing authority over the project.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for the purpose plane. Now let's wade into the really messy territory. The normative plane.
Yes, morality.
This is where we deal with duties, rights, and moral values. This seems entirely impossible for an architecture to govern because human beings have spent thousands of years arguing about morality and we still can't agree.
No, we really can't.
You have people who believe the ends always justify the means, and you have people who believe certain rules can never be broken regardless of the outcome. How does WIA handle competing moral frameworks without just picking a side?
By enforcing a principle called normative pluralism without averaging. The architecture explicitly refuses to compress different forms of moral reasoning into a single mathematical score.
Let's define those different forms of moral reasoning for a second, because the terminology can get dense. You have consequentialist reasoning, which is all about the outcome, doing whatever brings the most total good to the most people.
Right, utilitarianism, basically.
But then you have deontological reasoning.
Deontological reasoning is rule-based or duty-based ethics. It argues that certain actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of the consequences.
Give me an example of that clash.
For example, a deontological framework might say, you cannot violate a patient's bodily autonomy even if doing experiments on them would cure a disease for a million other people. The duty to the individual supersedes the aggregate outcome.
And the framework refuses to average those two philosophies together.
It strictly forbids it. If you try to turn complex moral trade-offs into a single aggregate ethics score, you destroy the necessary friction.
It's like mixing all the vibrant paint colors on an artist's palette together. You don't get a beautiful rainbow. You just get a useless, muddy brown.
Exactly.
If you average out a severe human rights violation with a massive economic profit, the spreadsheet might say the overall score is positive, but you've completely masked the moral catastrophe.
That is exactly the danger. A protected deontological right should not disappear just because an aggregate consequentialist welfare score is high. Conversely, a catastrophic consequential hazard, like an existential risk to a population, should not be ignored just because a specific procedural rule was technically followed.
Right.
If you average them out, you lose the specific nature of the conflict. So, WIA preserves unresolved conflict as an explicit, highly visible state in the system.
It preserves the conflict. It doesn't force a neat little resolution just to make the paperwork look clean.
No, it uses constitutional conflict mechanisms instead of a master equation. It utilizes rights floors lines that cannot be crossed regardless of the benefit.
Hard
Limits. It uses proportionality tests, heightened burdens of proof for irreversible harms, and it demands explicit minority reports. It refuses to build a master ethical score. Furthermore, it enforces the rule we discussed in Law 2. Facts do not create duties by themselves.
The transition from what is to what ought to be.
Right. An epistemic finding combined with an independently grounded normative rule plus relevant agency creates a duty candidate. The knowledge changes which duty is applicable, but the knowledge does not manufacture the morality from fact alone.
Okay, so we've mapped out our claims, avoided the algorithm trap, used our evidence graph to stop consensus laundering, validated our actual purpose without laundering the objective, and preserved our moral conflicts without muddying them into a single score.
That's a lot of safeguards.
All of these rules sound absolutely bulletproof on paper. But human beings are notoriously self-interested and relentlessly clever. The moment you write a rule, someone figures out a way to exploit it. People will game the system to get the outcome they want, regardless of the Constitution. How does WIA handle bad faith, hidden agendas, or strategic adaptation?
This is why the strategic plane is arguably the most critical addition to the entire framework. The architecture fundamentally recognizes that decisions do not enter a passive, static world.
People react.
Humans actively learn rules, they conceal private information, they coordinate with each other, and they adapt their behavior to optimize against whatever new metrics you just created.
It's the old adage. As soon as a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Goodhart's law, exactly.
If you measure factory workers by the number of nails they will produce thousands of tiny, useless nails. If you measure them by the weight of the nails, they will produce a few giant, heavy, useless nails. They will game the metric.
Precisely. The strategic plane operates on the principle of the induced game. The framework assumes that every consequential policy or decision rule induces a game.
Okay.
Before a decision is finalized, you have to analyze who the agents are, what private information they possess, what they can strategically hide, and how their behavior will drastically change specifically after the rule becomes known.
You can't just ask people for data and expect them to be honest if the honest answer actively hurts their budget or their prestige.
WIA states this plainly. A truthful interface is not a truthful equilibrium.
That is a great quote.
Using principles from mechanism design, the framework treats truthfulness as an incentive compatibility problem, not a moral failing. A system that looks completely sound mathematically under the naive assumption of truthful compliance will fail entirely once agents start strategically reporting data.
That makes me think about bureaucratic documentation. in so many large organizations. If you just fill out the right forms, use the right buzzwords, and check the right boxes, the system will approve whatever you want to do, even if the actual plan is terrible. It's totally gameable.
The framework categorizes that specific failure mode as receipt laundering.
Receipt laundering. Okay, how does that bypass the rules?
Receipt laundering occurs when the formal completeness of a document is treated as definitive proof that a decision was actually wise or correct.
Oh.
Imagine an automated system that checks a digital JSON file for a project approval. All the required fields are filled out, the syntax is perfectly valid, the timestamps are correct. The receipt validator algorithm looks at it and says, approved.
But the actual human reasoning typed inside those fields might be completely reckless, logically incoherent, or substantively empty.
Exactly. Valid JSON does not equal a correct decision. A perfectly formatted document can contain a perfectly terrible idea.
The canonical invariant here is, valid receipt does not equal correct decision. And the framework also aggressively guards against a temporal version of this fallacy called outcome laundering.
Right, outcome laundering.
How does outcome laundering work?
That is when a lucky, positive result is used to retroactively justify a reckless or unwarranted decision. Imagine a CEO bets the entire company's cash reserves on a single highly volatile stock.
Terrible idea.
It violates every risk management rule in the book. But purely by luck, the stock triples. Outcome laundering is when the institution looks back and says, well, it made us rich, so it must have been a brilliant, warranted decision.
But it wasn't brilliant. It was reckless gambling that just happened to pay off.
Exactly. Good outcomes do not prove sound reasoning, just as bad outcomes do not automatically prove irrationality. You can make the absolute best, most warranted decision possible, and a black swan event can still ruin the outcome.
Because you can't control the future.
This is why historical integrity on the temporal plane is paramount. You evaluate the decision based on the warrant at time 0, not the outcome at time 1.
Okay, so how do we actually stop receipt laundering and outcome laundering in practice? If we can't trust the paperwork because it might be gamed, and we can't judge purely by the final outcome because of luck, what is the anchor?
The anchor is what WIA calls the sufficient state principle, which is implemented through a highly specific artifact called a decision warrant receipt.
A decision warrant receipt. How is that fundamentally different from a normal, highly detailed form?
The sufficient state principle demands that no decision record may discard the information necessary for competent future reconsideration.
Okay.
A standard form just records the final choice and a brief summary of the justification. A decision warrant receipt must explicitly link to the entire evidence lineage, the evidence graph we discussed earlier.
So the receipt is permanently tethered to the graph of how the decision was made.
Yes. And crucially, the receipt must preserve the counter evidence.
The stuff that disagreed with the decision.
Right. It must explicitly record the expected evidence that was searched for but was missing. It must include unresolved normative conflicts and document the minority reports of those who dissented. It takes a perfect snapshot of exactly what was known, believed, and debated at time 0.
I see the power in that. If things go horribly wrong 2 years later, future reviewers can look at the receipt and say, okay, they made the best decision they could with the information they had, the failure was unpredictable.
Yep.
Or they can look at it and say, wow, they completely ignored this massive piece of counter evidence that was sitting right in front of them and they buried the minority report. You cannot rewrite history to hide your negligence.
Exactly. The strategic plane also mandates strategic stress tests, specifically designed to look for adversarial receipt laundering cases. The system actively hunts for vulnerabilities in its own governance.
Like red teaming.
It tests for scenarios where someone might create a document that is formally complete but substantively weak. And it specifically looks for a highly complex failure mode called compositional capture.
Compositional capture. That sounds like a systems engineering nightmare.
It is the most subtle and difficult failure mode to detect. It occurs when every individual component or department in a system complies perfectly with its local rules, but their interaction creates an unauthorized systemic escalation of power.
So component A is just doing its narrow job. Component B is just doing its narrow job. But when you string them together in a workflow, suddenly they're executing broad commands that neither one was actually authorized to make on their own.
Precisely. Imagine an epistemic model that generates a confidence score about a potential threat. That model has no authority to act. Then, an automated orchestrator translates that confidence score into a priority queue.
Still no action.
Then, an execution service acts on that priority queue by deploying resources. No single component ever explicitly claimed policy sovereignty or made a conscious decision, but the composition of the three created an automated sovereign execution. WIA requires end-to-end authority tracing across all component boundaries to prevent this kind of capture.
Okay, I have to be completely honest here. I am feeling incredibly overwhelmed. And I imagine anyone listening to this deep dive for, the past hour is feeling the exact same way.
It is a massive cognitive load, yes.
If an organization has to do this 7-plane analysis, map out an evidence graph, run strategic stress tests for induced games, and generate a sufficient state decision warrant receipt for every single choice they make, society will grind to a halt.
Oh, absolutely.
It will collapse under a mountain of unusable bureaucracy. Like, I can't run a counter-preference training module and a causal inference audit just to decide what color to paint the break room.
You are absolutely right to call that out. And the architects of the WIA framework knew that a system that is too heavy will simply be bypassed entirely by the humans using it. That is why they introduced the governing principle of resource proportionality.
Resource proportionality, thank goodness. How does that save us from the bureaucracy?
The framework explicitly does not demand maximum rigor for every decision. Process depth must scale based on specific risk factors: consequence, irreversibility, epistemic uncertainty, power asymmetry, and strategic exposure.
So it's a triage system.
Exactly. Routine, low-consequence, easily reversible decisions might just require a basic typed claim and local approval. Painting the break room does not require a decision warrant receipt.
Okay.
But if a decision has massive consequences, high uncertainty, or is fundamentally irreversible, like deploying a novel autonomous weapon system, altering the genetic code of a crop, or drastically shifting a public health policy, then the system demands maximum rigor.
Right, that makes total sense.
It requires independent normative scrutiny, strategic stress tests for induced games, documented minority reports, and a deeply comprehensive decision warrant receipt. The bureaucratic friction is intentionally designed to be proportional to the potential risk.
Okay, that makes me feel much better. But it brings up another vital point. This whole time we've been talking about invariants, graphs, nodes, registries, and programmatic triggers. It feels very automated, very computational. Where are the human beings in this architecture?
Ah, the human element.
Does WIA just replace human judgment with a giant, complex flowchart?
Absolutely not. The architecture is not just machines and graphs. It requires active human judgment at almost every single level. Humans must define the purposes, interpret the ambiguous evidence, negotiate the normative conflicts, and determine when a margin of uncertainty is finally tolerable.
So the system is relying on us to actually be wise enough to operate it.
It relies on humans to participate in what it calls the knowledge distribution audit.
What's that?
The architecture humbly recognizes that relevant knowledge isn't just sitting neatly formatted in a centralized database or an AI model. Knowledge is deeply distributed. It exists in local, on-the-ground experience, in the lived reality of affected communities, in historical precedent, and crucially, in the minds of adversarial observers.
So you have to actively go looking for the knowledge that isn't legible to the machine. You have to find the messy human context.
The audit specifically looks for structural ignorance, situations where the institutional decision process predictably and systematically excludes certain types of information.
Because it's inconvenient.
Or just hard to measure. This is why whistleblowing channels, contestability by affected parties, and minority reports are not just legal safeguards in WIA. They are explicitly built in as core epistemic mechanisms. They are how the system learns what it doesn't know.
But humans are inherently biased. We protect our own institutions. We hide our mistakes to save our jobs. How do you get humans to actually execute this rigorous honesty?
Which is why the WIA framework includes a formation layer specifically for human operators, emphasizing a practice called counter-preference training.
Counter-preference training. That sounds intense, like psychological conditioning.
It is a rigorous discipline. Humans must actively practice upholding the constitutional principles specifically when it is actively costly, embarrassing, or inconvenient to their own institution.
Oh, wow.
You run training cases where a subordinate is factually correct and the boss is demonstrably wrong. You run cases where an impressive, massively expensive computational model fails real-world validation and has to be publicly scrapped.
You train them to take the hit.
The goal is to habituate loss-bearing correction. A principle that survives only when it benefits you financially or politically isn't a principle at all. It's just convenient rhetoric. Humans have to be formed to bear the cost of truth.
Wow. Okay, I need to clarify something fundamental here.
Mhm.
After all of this, after mastering the 3 laws, navigating the 7 planes, building the evidence graph to stop consensus laundering, running the strategic stress tests, and undergoing counter-preference training, there is no final wise or not wise stamp that the machine gives you at the end of the process, is there?
No, there is no final stamp. The WIA framework is not a magical oracle. It doesn't certify wisdom. You cannot compress human wisdom into a digital schema validator.
Then what is the ultimate point of all this massive architectural effort?
The point is to make unwarranted authority incredibly difficult to acquire, conceal, preserve, and exercise. It doesn't guarantee you will make the perfect, flawless choice every time, but it forces human beings to take what the framework calls activated responsibility.
Activated
It
responsibility.
ensures that a capability does not silently become a permission, and an explanation does not silently become a justification. It governs the boundaries, so that when a human does finally make a consequential judgment, they do so with their eyes wide open to the assumptions they are making, the evidence they are missing, and the strategic risks they are taking.
That is profound. It's not a wisdom-generating machine. It's a foolishness-blocking architecture.
Yes, exactly.
It forces you to show your work, acknowledge your blind spots, and leave a perfectly preserved trail for the people who come after you to correct your inevitable mistakes.
It is a constitutional architecture for warranted authority in an age where authority is the easiest thing to fake.
What a journey. Let's summarize the deep dive we just took. We explored how to survive the information age, an era where data is cheap, computation is abundant, but disciplined judgment is terrifyingly rare.
So rare.
We learned that we have to act as strict constitutional auditors of authority. We must demand qualifiers to avoid the algorithm trap, remembering that stationarity does not equal optimality and verification does not equal validation.
Right.
We must map evidence graphs to stop consensus laundering, carefully distinguishing an echo from a true chorus. We must trace our purposes to avoid objective laundering, preserve our moral conflicts without muddying them into a single score, and refuse to let technically valid JSON paperwork mask foolish receipt-laundered decisions.
Beautifully summarized.
And we must enforce corrigibility so that past authority doesn't persist without renewed warrant.
We have to earn every promotion, keep every authority rigidly in its role, and mathematically and morally re-justify every persistence of power.
But I want to leave you with a final, unaddressed question that builds on all this material. We talked about how the WIA framework requires this incredibly rigorous formal decision warrant receipt for every transition of authority. We want to avoid receipt laundering and outcome laundering. We want everything documented, traceable, and explicit. But what happens to genuine human intuition?
A fascinating and dangerous frontier.
Think about it. If a brilliantly wise but entirely tacit leap of human insight, a gut feeling based on decades of unquantifiable on-the-ground experience, if that insight cannot produce a valid, perfectly formatted decision warrant receipt with a neat computational evidence lineage, does this architecture risk suffocating the very human wisdom it was built to protect?
It's a real risk.
If we demand that every leap of genius be legible to the machine, do we filter out the kind of wisdom that simply can't be put into a JSON file, something for you to mull over?
The boundary between formal structural governance and the irreducible spark of human judgment will always be the hardest frontier to navigate.
We started this deep dive talking about the muddy waters of diagnosis, the lack of a clean binary X-ray for the world's most complex problems. WIA doesn't give us a magic X-ray to instantly see wisdom, but maybe it gives us the right kind of flashlight and the right kind of map to navigate the mud without sinking. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the authority of the claims around you. Keep looking for the qualifiers, and we'll see you next time.